Evelyn Harper threw the coin back across the counter and looked the man dead in the eye. "I don't need your pity," she said. "I need you to leave." The whole store went quiet. Every person in Red Willow Creek knew Evelyn knew her size, knew her shop, knew the way men laughed when she walked past. But not one of them had ever seen her throw anything back at anyone. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1885 arrived in Red Willow Creek, the way bad news always did, hot, sudden, and without apology. By the time July pressed its full weight down on the valley, the dirt roads had cracked into pale ribbons. The creek had dropped to barely a whisper, and the people of the town had grown mean the way people do when they are too hot and too bored and too certain they already know everything worth knowing about everyone around them. Evelyn Harper had lived in Red Willow Creek for all 25 years of her life, and she had spent most of those years learning exactly what the town thought of her. She knew it from the way women pulled their skirts aside when she passed on the boardwalk. She knew it from the way men laughed too loud from the porch of the saloon whenever she carried supplies from Clancy's general store back to her shop. She knew it from the way children sometimes repeated without malice and without understanding words they had heard at the dinner table. Words that landed on her the same way stones landed on water. Hard, cold, gone in a second, but leaving ripples that lasted all afternoon. She was not ugly. Anyone with honest eyes could see that. Her face was round and soft with dark eyes that caught the light and a mouth that, when it smiled, made the room feel like something warm had just walked in. Her hair was thick and brown, and she kept it pinned at the back of her neck, though pieces of it were always escaping, always curling loose around her temples by mid-morning, no matter what she did. Her hands were clever hands, quick with a needle, sure with scissors, capable of making something beautiful out of what other people had given up on. But the town of Red Willow Creek did not look at Evelyn Harper's hands or her eyes or the quality of her work. The town looked at her size. She was a large woman, not the kind of large that people politely ignored, but the kind they talked about openly as though her body were public property, available for anyone's comment or criticism. She had been large since girlhood. She would likely always be large. And somewhere between the ages of 12 and 15, she had made a decision, quiet and private, and held close to her chest like a hand of cards no one else would ever see. She would not let them make her small in the ways that actually mattered. Her shop was called Harper's Fine Alterations, and it sat on the east end of the main road between the post office and a building that had been 3 different businesses in the last 4 years and was currently sitting empty. The shop was not much to look at from the outside. A narrow front, a door that needed a firm push to open all the way, a window with her name painted in steady black letters across the glass. But inside, it smelled like clean cloth and cedar, and the faint sweetness of the beeswax she used on her thread, and every surface was organized and precise in a way that said something about the woman who ran it. She opened at 7 each morning. She took her lunch at noon. She locked up at 6 and walked home to the small house her parents had left her, cooked whatever she had available, and went to bed. It was a quiet life. It was a life that suited her mostly, though there were evenings when the quiet had a different quality. Heavier, longer at the edges, and she would sit on the porch with a cup of tea cooling in her hands and watch the road and think about the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who had decided not to see you. On the 3rd Thursday in July, 2 things happened that changed everything. The first was Henry Marsh. Henry Marsh was a cattle buyer from Tucson, a wide man with red-veined cheeks, and the kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from money, and the habit of never being contradicted. He had been passing through Red Willow Creek on his way south, and he had come into Evelyn's shop that morning because one of his jacket buttons had come off somewhere between the hotel and the street, and a man like Henry Marsh did not walk into business meetings with a missing button. Evelyn had been at her cutting table when the bell above the door rang. She had looked up, assessed the situation in one glance, and said, "Sit down, sir. I'll have that fixed in under 10 minutes." Henry Marsh did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the shop and looked at her the way people sometimes looked at things they weren't sure they wanted to touch. "You're the seamstress," he said. "I am," Evelyn said. She had already found the right thread and was threading the needle. "They didn't tell me you were—" He stopped. Let the silence do the rest. Evelyn did not look up. "Sit down, sir," she said again. 10 minutes. He sat, grudgingly, like a man doing her a favor by existing in her vicinity. She fixed the button in 7 minutes. She snipped the thread, smoothed the lapel, and handed the jacket back to him without ceremony. Henry Marsh put the jacket on and examined himself, and Evelyn could see the moment he realized the work was perfect. The button was seated correctly. The thread matched the repair was invisible. She had done it without fuss, without conversation, without requiring anything from him at all. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a coin which he set on the counter. And then he looked at her and said, "I'll bet you're real grateful for the customers who don't mind coming in here." The shop was not empty. Mrs. Aldrich from the millinery next door was there to pick up the hat she'd brought in 2 days ago. Young Tommy Greer was sitting by the window waiting for his father's shirt. 2 women Evelyn barely knew had come in together, whispering the way they always did. Every one of them went still. Evelyn looked at the coin on the counter. She looked at Henry Marsh. She picked up the coin, held it for 1 long second, and then she set it back down on his side of the counter. Firmly, deliberately. The sound it made against the wood was small, but it filled the whole room. "I don't need your pity," she said. "I need you to leave." Henry Marsh stared at her. "I beg your—" "You heard me, sir." Her voice was steady. It was always steady. She had worked a long time to make it that way. "The price of that repair is 40 cents. You can leave it on the counter or take it with you and owe me, but either way, I'm going to need you to walk out that door now." Henry Marsh's face went through several colors. He glanced at the other people in the shop, at Mrs. Aldrich, who had gone very still, at the 2 whispering women who had stopped whispering entirely, as though hoping someone would come to his aid. No one did. He left 40 cents on the counter. He left without another word. The door swung shut behind him. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Tommy Greer, who was 9 years old and had been watching all of this with enormous eyes, said, "Miss Evelyn, did you just tell that man to get out?" "I did," Evelyn said. She picked up the coin without looking at it and dropped it in the register. "Mama says a woman oughtn't speak to customers that way." "Your mama's right," Evelyn said. "But that man wasn't a customer anymore. He was done with his business." She picked up her scissors. "That's a different thing entirely." Tommy thought about this for a moment. Then he nodded as though she'd said something he would carry with him for a while. The 2 women left without buying anything. Mrs. Aldrich collected her hat and paused at the door and said quietly, "Good for you, Evelyn." And Evelyn had smiled at her and said, "Thank you, Margaret." And that was that. By noon, half the town had heard some version of the story. By 3 o'clock, the version Henry Marsh was telling at the saloon involved considerably more drama and considerably less dignity on his part, so he had rearranged the facts accordingly. Depending on who was telling it, Evelyn had either thrown him out, bodily insulted his mother, or accused him of theft. None of this was true, but truth in Red Willow Creek had always been secondary to a good story, especially on a hot Thursday in July. Evelyn knew when she locked up the shop that evening that the gossip had already moved faster than she had. She could feel it in the way people looked at her as she walked home. Some with amusement, some with disapproval, some with the flat assessing look of people deciding how much trouble she had just caused herself. She held her bag in both hands and kept her head up and walked at her normal pace and did not look at anyone longer than necessary. She had gotten halfway home when she saw the horse. It was standing at the hitching post outside old Bauer's grain storage, or what had been Bauer's grain storage before he closed it up and went back east. The horse was a tall bay, dark and fine-boned, and it was lathered at the neck in a way that said it had been ridden hard. It stood with its head down and its legs splayed slightly, the posture of an animal that had been pushed past comfort. Evelyn stopped. She looked at the horse. She looked at the closed building behind it. She looked at the rope tied to the post, which was tied with the casual efficiency of someone who knew horses and had done it in a hurry. Then she heard something inside the building, not a sound exactly, more of a presence, a weight behind the silence, and she stood for a moment calculating. She could keep walking. It was nearly evening, and this was not her horse, and not her building, and not her business. She did not keep walking. She pushed the door open. The inside of the old grain storage was dim and smelled like dust and old straw, and the ghost of something that had once been stored in it and was long gone. Light came in through the cracks in the boards and through the gap where the door now stood open, and it fell in pale stripes across the dirt floor and across the man sitting against the far wall with one leg stretched out in front of him and the other bent at the knee. He was a large man. Even sitting down, she could see that the broad line of his shoulders, the long reach of his legs. He had dark hair under a battered hat, and a face that in the low light was all angles and shadows, a jaw like a ledge, a nose that had been broken at least once and healed imperfectly, a mouth pressed flat in the expression of someone holding something in through sheer will. He had 3 days of dark stubble and a cut above his left eyebrow that had bled down his temple and dried there brown and stiff. His right hand was pressed flat against his left side. Evelyn looked at the hand. She looked at the careful stillness of his posture. "How bad?" she said. The man's eyes opened. They were dark, and for a moment they were unfocused, and then they found her and sharpened and held her. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was deep and rough and sounded like it hadn't been used in a while. "I apologize for the intrusion." "I didn't ask for an apology," Evelyn said. "I asked how bad." He looked at her for another moment, assessing, she thought, the way people did when they were deciding how much to say and to whom. Then he said, "It ain't a bullet. Got thrown off my horse when the saddle slipped going down a rocky grade. Something's wrong with my ribs. Cracked or broken? Can't tell yet. Cracked, I think. Breathing hurts, but I can do it." "Have you eaten?" Whatever he had been expecting her to say, it wasn't that. His expression shifted barely just enough to notice, and he said, "No, ma'am, not since this morning early." "When did this happen?" "The fall. Around midday." Evelyn looked at the light coming through the wall boards. It was past 6 o'clock. The man had been sitting on the floor of an empty grain storage for the better part of 4 hours alone in the summer heat with cracked ribs and no food. And nobody who knew he was there. "You should have asked someone for help," she said. "Wasn't sure the town would be interested," he said. She almost asked him why he'd thought that, and then she didn't, because she understood the thought behind it. She had spent 25 years in Red Willow Creek. She knew exactly how interested the town was in helping strangers who arrived without recommendation or introduction. "Can you walk?" she said. "I can walk. My house is 3 minutes from here. You'll come and eat something and let me look at those ribs." She turned toward the door. "I'm Evelyn Harper. I run the seamstress shop on the East Road." She heard him moving behind her, the slow, deliberate sounds of a large man getting to his feet while trying not to aggravate what hurt. "Nathan Cole," he said. "Mr. Cole." "Ma'am?" A pause. "I don't want to cause you trouble." "You haven't caused me anything yet," she said. "Come on before it gets dark." Nathan Cole walked behind her the 3 minutes to her house, and she did not look back to check on him because she had said he could walk, and she believed him. She could hear him breathing, controlled, measured the breathing of someone managing pain carefully. She could hear the slight adjustment of his stride that told her the ribs were worse on the left side. She did not comment on any of this. Her house was small and well-ordered, the kind of space that looked lived in without looking neglected. She pushed the door open and said, "Sit at the table," and went immediately to the kitchen area. She heard him settle into the chair nearest the door, not because she had indicated it, but because it was the one closest to the exit, and she thought that probably said something about how Nathan Cole moved through the world. She built the fire up and put water on and set out what she had: cold biscuits from the morning, a tin of beans she'd been saving, half a smoked sausage she'd gotten from the butcher 2 days ago. She cut the sausage and put the beans on to heat and set the biscuits on the table without ceremony. "Eat those while you wait," she said. He picked up a biscuit with his right hand and took a bite, and she watched from the corner of her eye and saw the way he ate it, not quickly, not desperately, but with the careful focus of someone who had learned not to take food for granted. She poured water into a basin and found clean cloth and brought both to the table and said, "Let me see the cut first." He didn't argue. He took off his hat and tilted his head slightly, and she examined the cut above his eyebrow with practiced efficiency. It was not deep enough to need stitching, but it had bled considerably and needed to be cleaned. She worked in silence. He held still the way horses held still when they trusted a person, not because they were forced to, but because something in them had decided the person was safe. When she had cleaned the cut and pressed a folded cloth against it and told him to hold it there, she said, "Now the ribs. I'm going to need to feel along them. Tell me where it hurts." He set down the cloth he'd been holding to his face, and he looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "Miss Harper." "Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn." He said her name carefully, like he was making sure he had it right. "You're being very kind to me." "I'm being practical," she said. "Cracked ribs that aren't wrapped will keep cracking. Now shirt up, please." He complied, and she pressed her fingers along his left side with care, and he made no sound when she found the tender places except to exhale very slowly through his nose. 2 ribs, she thought. Maybe 3. Cracked, not broken. He'd been right about that. "I can bind these," she said. "It won't fix them, but it'll make it easier to breathe. You'll need to rest them for at least a week." "I've got to be—" "Mr. Cole," she said, and the firmness in her voice stopped him. "You can tell me what you've got to do after I've finished the beans. Right now you're going to let me bind these ribs, and you're going to eat something hot, and then we'll figure out the rest." Nathan Cole looked at her. "All right," he said. She bound the ribs with strips of clean cloth while the beans heated on the stove, and he sat with his hands flat on the table and stared at the wall across from him while she worked. He had a scar on his left forearm, long and pale, and another on his right shoulder, and smaller marks here and there that told the story of a life lived outdoors and often in difficulty. His hands were large and work-roughened and utterly still. When she had finished binding, and he had lowered his shirt, she put the beans on the table and sat down across from him for the first time. "What brings you through Red Willow Creek, Mr. Cole?" she said. "Work," he said. "Heading to the Grayson spread north of town. I've got a job there starting Monday." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "William Grayson's ranch," she said. "That's the one. You know him." "I know of him," she said. "Everyone in Red Willow Creek knows William Grayson." Nathan looked at her face, which had not changed, and seemed to understand from what she didn't say as much as from what she did. "He's a difficult man. He's a man who believes he's the most important person in any room he walks into," Evelyn said, "which makes him tolerable in small doses and unbearable in large ones." She paused. "He also believes very firmly that other people owe him their good opinion." "I've worked for men like that before," Nathan said. And I know how to do my job without requiring them to like me." He picked up his spoon. "I don't need much, just the work." She watched him eat. She watched the way he was careful about it, not eating too fast, not taking too much, maintaining the courtesy of a man who understood he was eating someone else's food in someone else's house, and who intended to conduct himself accordingly. "You said you weren't sure the town would help you," she said. "Did someone tell you that, or did you just assume it?" "I rode through town before I found the old building," he said. "Saw enough to make a judgment." "What did you see?" He was quiet for a moment, and she had the feeling he was choosing his words with some care. "I saw a town where people were comfortable," he said. "And comfortable towns don't tend to be kind to people who show up looking like I looked today." Evelyn considered this. "That's true of a lot of towns," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "But some have 1 or 2 people in them who are different." She wasn't sure what he meant by that, whether he was talking about her specifically or speaking in general terms, and she did not ask. She got up and poured water for both of them and sat back down and said, "Where are you from originally, Mr. Cole?" "Here and there," he said. "Grew up in New Mexico territory. Been working my way north and east for about 6 years now." "What were you doing before ranch work?" A pause. Brief enough that she almost didn't notice it, but she noticed it. "Security work," he said. "Guarding freight. Cattle drives a few times." "That's hard work." "It's work," he said, which she thought was probably the most honest answer he could give. The evening settled around them. Outside, Red Willow Creek did what small western towns did in the evening. The sounds of horses and boots on boardwalk gradually quieted. The saloon noise picked up in compensation. The sky went from gold to orange to the deep flat blue of summer dusk. Inside Evelyn's kitchen was warm and ordinary, and Nathan Cole sat at her table and finished his beans and did not say anything unnecessary, and Evelyn found to her own mild surprise that she did not mind the company. She had not had company in a long time. She had not let herself notice that as much as she noticed it now. When he had finished eating, he set his spoon down and said, "I should find somewhere to stay tonight." "The hotel on Main Street will have a room," she said. "Or you could sleep in the old Bower building where I found you if you'd rather not spend the money." "I'd rather not spend the money," he said. He looked at the empty bowl. He looked at her. "Miss Harper." "Evelyn. Evelyn." He said it the same way he'd said it before, with that careful precision. "I owe you." "You don't," she said. "But if you want to repay me, you can tell me something honestly." "All right." "When you rode through town this afternoon," she said, "and you made your judgment about whether people would help you, was I part of that judgment? Did you see me before I found you?" He was quiet for a moment that stretched just long enough to be its own answer. "I saw you come out of the shop," he said. "I saw the way people looked at you on the street." She nodded. She had known it would be something like that. "And I thought," he said, and then he stopped, and she waited, and he said, "I thought that a woman who walks through that kind of looking, without putting her head down, is either very strong or very used to it. And either way, she'd probably understand something about needing help without wanting to make a show of needing it." Evelyn looked at him. "That's a very precise thing to think about a stranger," she said. "I've had a lot of time alone," he said. "I notice things." The fire had burned down to coals by the time he left, and Evelyn stood in the doorway and watched him walk back toward town, slowly, carefully. One hand pressed light against his side, and she was aware of a feeling she couldn't quite name. Not loneliness, though loneliness was always somewhere in the vicinity. Not hope exactly, though it was in that direction. Something smaller and more private than either of those words. She had given him directions to the Bower building and told him to come back in the morning if the ribs were giving him trouble, and he had said, "I won't trouble you further," and she had said, "It isn't trouble," and he had looked at her with those dark eyes and said, "Good night, Evelyn," and she had said, "Good night, Mr. Cole." She stood in the doorway until she couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. Then she went inside and washed the bowls and put out the fire and went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time. She thought about the way he had said she was strong or very used to it. She thought about the coin Henry Marsh had put on the counter and the way she had slid it back. She thought about Tommy Greer's eyes when she'd told that man to leave. She thought about 25 years of people deciding what she was worth based on the size of the space she took up in a room. And she thought just before she slept that something had shifted today. She couldn't say what. She couldn't say how she knew. But something had changed the way weather changes, not visible, yet, not named yet, but present in the air, in the weight of the sky, in the way the evening had felt different from the ones before it. Red Willow Creek would wake up tomorrow the same way it always did. But Evelyn Harper, lying in the dark with her hands folded quiet on her chest, thought that maybe she would not. Across town, in the dim stillness of the old grain storage, Nathan Cole lay on his bedroll, with his ribs bound tight and his arm over his eyes, and the night sounds of the town drifting in through the board walls, and he did not sleep immediately. He thought about the woman who had walked into the building without fear, and asked him how bad it was before she even knew his name. He thought about the steadiness of her hands when she cleaned the cut above his eye. He thought about the way she had said, "Come on before it gets dark," as though helping a stranger was simply the next thing on the list of things to do, ordinary as locking up the shop or putting beans on the stove. He thought about the way the town had looked at her. He thought about the way she had walked through it anyway. He had been in a lot of towns. He had learned over years to read them fast, to know within a few hours which ones were safe and which ones had a different kind of danger underneath the ordinary surface. Red Willow Creek was not a dangerous town in the way some were. There were no outlaws running it, no corruption so thick you could taste it. But it had the particular cruelty of a place that had decided what everyone was worth and had stopped asking the question again. He had seen that kind of town before. He knew what it did to people over time. He thought about Evelyn Harper sitting across from him at her kitchen table, steady and direct, and entirely herself with flour on her sleeve, and her hair coming loose from its pins, and her dark eyes watching him with a frank attention that he hadn't known how to look away from. He thought about the way she had said, "It isn't trouble." He thought about the way she had not apologized for anything. Not for her house, not for the simple food, not for the directness of her manner, not for being who she was. He had met a lot of people in 6 years of traveling. Most of them were trying to convince him of something. Most of them wanted something from him that he couldn't easily name and couldn't easily give. Evelyn Harper had wanted 40 cents for a missing button. He almost smiled lying in the dark. His ribs ached and the floor was hard, and Monday was still 4 days away. He had money enough for those days barely. He had a job waiting and a town that had already shown him what it thought of strangers, and a woman 3 minutes away who had told him to come back if the ribs were giving him trouble. He did not know what Red Willow Creek was going to be. He did not know yet what any of this was, but he lay in the dark and listened to the summer night, and thought for the first time in a long time that the air in a place felt different from the air in the places before it. He closed his eyes. Outside the creek ran soft in the distance, just loud enough to hear if you were listening. Nathan Cole, who had always been listening, heard it, and slept. Nathan Cole came back the next morning. Evelyn was at her cutting table when she heard the knock. 2 knocks measured and deliberate, the kind that said, "I'm here," without saying, "I need anything." She set down her scissors and went to the door and opened it, and he was standing on her porch with his hat in his hand, and the morning light behind him, and his left arm held very slightly away from his body, the way people held themselves when something hurt that they didn't want to admit hurt. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he said. "I came to return the cloth you used for the binding. I washed it." He held it out. It was folded neatly cleaner than she'd expected from a man who had slept on the floor of a grain storage. Evelyn looked at the cloth. She looked at him. "How are the ribs?" "Manageable." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "They're sore," he said. "But I can breathe without it catching, which is better than yesterday." "Come in," she said. "I was about to make coffee." He came in the same way he had come in the night before, quietly, with the particular carefulness of a large man who knew he took up space and had learned to take it up with intention rather than accident. He sat in the same chair. He set his hat on the table beside him. She put the coffee on and stood at the stove with her back to him and said, "You don't have to bring things back, you know. It was a piece of cloth." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I wanted to." She turned to look at him over her shoulder. He was looking at the window, not at anything outside it, just at the light coming through with an expression that was difficult to read. Not sad exactly. Something quieter than sad. Something that had gone past the stage of being active and had settled into something older and more permanent. "Do you know anyone in town?" she asked. "Besides Grayson's people?" "No," he said. "And Grayson's people, you've met them?" "Not yet. I meant to start Monday." He looked at her. "I came through this way early to find the place get oriented. I don't like arriving somewhere for the first time when I'm expected to start working the same day." "That's sensible," she said. "Most people think it's strange." "Most people don't think very carefully about logistics," she said, and poured the coffee and brought both cups to the table and sat down. They drank in silence for a moment, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It had the quality of a silence between people who did not feel the need to fill space for the sake of filling it, which was, Evelyn thought, rarer than it should have been. "What kind of work do they have you doing at Grayson's?" she asked. "General ranch hand to start. Fence repair, cattle management, some driving." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "If it goes well, he wants someone to manage his eastern pastures. That would be a longer arrangement." "And is that what you want? A longer arrangement?" He looked at the cup. "I want something that lasts more than a season," he said. "I've been moving a long time. I'd like to stop moving." The directness of it surprised her, not because it was inappropriate, but because most people didn't say things like that plainly without dressing them up in something more acceptable. Most people said they were looking for opportunity, or good work, or a change of scenery. They didn't say, "I am tired of moving, and I want to stop." "Then I hope Grayson's arrangement suits you," she said. "So do I." He looked at her. "Do you think it will?" She considered how to answer that honestly. "William Grayson is a demanding employer," she said. "He pays reasonably from what I've heard, and he doesn't tolerate sloppiness. But he has opinions about people, and he states them without much regard for whether the person wants to hear them." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that come from a man who has been the richest person in a room for so long that he's started to believe wealth is a form of wisdom," she said. Nathan looked at her steadily. "Has he given you trouble?" "He gives everyone trouble eventually," she said. "He hasn't made a particular project of me yet, but I've been here long enough that I expect it's only a matter of time." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I heard something when I was in the saloon last night getting water." She waited. "A man was telling a story about a seamstress who threw a cattle buyer out of her shop," he said. The story got more colorful with each telling. Evelyn picked up her coffee cup. "I imagine it did. You don't seem troubled by it." "It would be exhausting to be troubled by everything this town decides to say about me," she said. "I picked my battles a long time ago." He studied her face. "And is that a battle you picked or one that picked you?" She set the cup down. "Both," she said, "which is usually how it goes." He nodded slowly, like a man filing something away. The morning moved on. He finished his coffee and stood to go, and she walked him to the door, and he paused on the threshold and said, "Might I come by the shop this afternoon? I have a shirt that needs a button." "You can bring it by," she said. "I charge 15 cents for a button." "That seems fair," he said. "It is fair," she said. "That's the difference between me and some of the other shops in town." He almost smiled. She saw at the very edge of it a small shift at the corner of his mouth before he put his hat on and walked back toward town. She stood in the doorway for a moment after he had gone and thought about that almost smile. Then she went back inside and picked up her scissors and got to work. He came by the shop at 2 o'clock, as the afternoon heat had settled in full and the street outside had gone quiet with it. The bell above the door rang, and he came in, and Evelyn was with a customer. Mrs. Paulson, the banker's wife, who was having a dress let out at the waist, and who had opinions about everything offered freely and at length. Mrs. Paulson stopped speaking mid-sentence and looked at Nathan Cole. She looked at him the way women in Red Willow Creek looked at men they didn't recognize with a particular assessment that took in clothing bearing and the condition of the boots all in about 3 seconds and arrived at a verdict almost immediately. "Good afternoon," Nathan said to both of them, and he stood near the door and held his hat and waited. Mrs. Paulson leaned very slightly toward Evelyn and said in a voice that was almost but not quite a whisper, "Who is that?" "A customer," Evelyn said. "If you'll hold still, Mrs. Paulson, I'll have this finished in 5 minutes." Mrs. Paulson held still, but her eyes kept moving back to Nathan. And Nathan looked at the wall, with the polite blankness of a man who was accustomed to being looked at and had decided some time ago to simply wait it out. Evelyn finished the hem. Mrs. Paulson paid and left, and on her way out, she gave Nathan another long look and said, "Are you one of Grayson's men?" Starting Monday, Nathan said. Mrs. Paulson nodded as though this settled something. Well, she said, welcome to Red Willow Creek. And then she was gone. Evelyn watched the door swing shut. She'll have told 4 people about you before she reaches the end of the block, she said. I don't mind people knowing I'm here, Nathan said. I mind when they decide things about me before they know anything. That happens fast in a town this size, Evelyn said. She held out her hand for the shirt. He gave it to her. She examined the missing button and the fabric around it. The thread holes were worn, but not frayed badly enough to need reinforcement, and she had the right button in her supply drawer, close enough to match that no one would notice. Sit down, she said. 10 minutes, she said. 10 is. He sat in the chair near the window, the same chair Tommy Greer had sat in the morning, before the chair that had become, in Evelyn's mind, the chair for people who were waiting without being in a hurry about it. He didn't talk while she worked. He watched the street through the window, and she watched her needle, and it was the same kind of quiet that had been in her kitchen that morning, which was to say, it was fine. After a few minutes, he said without turning from the window, There's a boy across the street who's been watching this shop for about 20 minutes. Evelyn looked up. Through the window, she could see the far side of the street, and there in the narrow shade between the feed store and the dry goods was a small figure she recognized. That's Billy Reeves, she said. He's 8. He comes by when his mother sends him with mending, and he's worked up the nerve to knock. He doesn't want to come in. He's shy, she said, and his mother doesn't always have the money ready, so he worries I'll send him away. Nathan looked at the boy for a moment. Then he stood up with the deliberate care of his ribs and said, May I? Evelyn looked at him. May you what? Go talk to him. She studied his face, which was entirely serious. All right, she said. He went outside. She watched through the window as he walked across the street, not fast, not hurried, just steady, and crouched down at the edge of the shade so that he was at the boy's level. She could not hear what they said. She could see Nathan speak, and the boy look up at him with the enormous eyes of a child, confronted with a very large and serious adult, and then she saw Nathan say something and the boy nod, and then Nathan straightened, and the boy walked across the street toward the shop. The bell rang. Billy Reeves came in with a bundle of folded fabric clutched to his chest and said, Miss Evelyn, Mama sent these, and she said she'll have the money at the end of the week, and she's real sorry she doesn't have it now. That's fine, Billy, Evelyn said. Set them on the counter, and I'll have them done by Friday. Billy set them down carefully. He looked at the shirt in Evelyn's hands. He looked at the window. That man outside, he said. He told me you'd say that. Did he? He said you weren't the kind of person who sent people away over something like money. Billy seemed to turn this over. He said it like he was sure about it. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. He was right, she said. Billy left with the satisfied air of someone whose errand had gone better than expected. Evelyn finished the button and tied off the thread and held the shirt up to check the line of it, and the door opened, and Nathan came back in. How much does Billy's mother owe? He said. Mr. Cole. How much? She looked at him. 30 cents, she said. But it's not your concern. I know it isn't. He reached into his pocket and put 30 cents on the counter. Consider it a thank you for the coffee. She looked at the coins. She looked at him. You don't have to buy things to express gratitude. I know, he said. But I wanted to. Same words he'd used that morning about the cloth. She noticed that about him, he said things he meant, and he meant them the same way each time without ornamentation. She left the coins on the counter. She handed him the shirt. 15 cents, she said. He paid her. He put the shirt under his arm. He said, Thank you, Evelyn. And she said, Come back if you need anything else, Mr. Cole. And he went to the door and then stopped with his hand on the frame and said without turning around, Do you eat lunch at the shop? Sometimes, she said. Would you mind company tomorrow? She did not answer immediately because she was thinking, and she had learned that it was better to think before answering than to answer before thinking. I usually eat at noon, she said. I have a bench out back. I'll bring food, he said. You don't need to bring food. I know, he said, but I want to. He turned just enough for her to see the edge of that almost smile again. Good afternoon, Evelyn. He was gone before she could say anything else. She stood at her counter for a moment. Then Mrs. Aldrich from next door appeared in the doorway with the particular look of a woman who has seen and heard rather more than she should have. Evelyn Harper, she said. Margaret, Evelyn said. That is a very large, very quiet man who just looked at you like you were the only sensible thing he'd seen in a week. He needed a button, Evelyn said. People don't linger over buttons, Margaret said. Some people do. Evelyn, Margaret. Evelyn picked up her scissors. Don't you have hats to make? Margaret left, but she was smiling. Evelyn did not look up to see it, but she heard it in the sound of the woman's footsteps going back next door. That particular lightness that meant she was already thinking about who to tell first. Evelyn pulled Billy Reeves's mother's mending toward her and began to examine the first piece. She did not smile. She came very close to it. Nathan came at noon the next day with bread and cold chicken wrapped in cloth, and he sat on the bench outside the back door of her shop and ate with her in the shade, and they talked. Not about anything extraordinary about the town, about the work she did, about the logistics of Grayson's ranch and what he knew of it, about the heat and whether August would be worse or better, about small things, the kind of small things that are only small on the surface and mean something else entirely, when two people who have been careful and lonely for a long time are the ones saying them. He came back the day after that, and the day after that. By the end of the week, it had become not an arrangement exactly, and not something either of them named, but a pattern. He would come at noon, and they would eat on the bench, and sometimes in the morning he would stop by on his way through town, and sometimes in the late afternoon he came by on some small and credible errand. The town noticed. Of course the town noticed. Red Willow Creek was not large enough for anything to go unnoticed, and the combination of Nathan Cole, who was tall and dark and clearly capable, and worked for the most powerful man in the area, and Evelyn Harper, who was Evelyn Harper, was the kind of thing that the town felt obligated to have an opinion about. She heard the first comments on Wednesday. She was at Clancy's general store buying thread and sugar when she heard two women behind the fabric display speaking in the particular, not quiet voice of people who want to be overheard. I heard he has lunch with her every day, the first one said. He's probably just being polite, the second one said. Being new in town and all. Polite. A pause full of implication. Well, he doesn't know anyone else yet. Once he does. Evelyn set her thread on the counter. She said, Good afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher. Mrs. Cole. Not the same Cole as Nathan, just an unlucky coincidence of name, and both women flushed and said good afternoon, and went very quiet, and Evelyn paid for her items and left without hurrying. She told Nathan about it the following noon. She was not sure why she did not usually report the town's commentary to anyone because there was no one to report it to. But she told him and he listened, and when she finished he said, Does it bother you? It would bother me more if I let it change my behavior, she said. He looked at her. That's not the same as saying it doesn't bother you. She considered him. No, she said. It isn't. Then it does. Some? She said. The part of me that got tired a long time ago still gets tired. I can't always make that part be quiet. She looked at her hands. But the other part, the part that decided this is my town and my shop and my life, that part is louder most of the time. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I know that feeling. Do you? I've spent 6 years being the stranger in every town I came through, he said. The man people look at and decide things about before he opens his mouth. The man who doesn't belong. He set down the cloth the food had been wrapped in. I thought I'd gotten used to it. But getting used to something isn't the same as it not mattering. Evelyn looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the ground between his boots in the particular way of a man saying something true that he has not said often. "What happened 6 years ago?" she said. He went still. "You said you'd been moving for 6 years," she said. Something started the moving. The silence stretched. It was a different kind of silence from their usual ones. It had weight and edges to it, and she was aware that she had gone further than she usually went this early with anyone, and she was also aware that she didn't want to pull the question back. "I was working a freight run," he said finally, "out of Albuquerque. 3 wagons, 6 men including me." He stopped. "We got hit by a group out of the hills east of the city. 4 of us made it. 2 didn't." She waited. "I was supposed to be watching the east approach," he said. "I wasn't watching it the way I should have been." A long pause. "One of the men who died was 20 years old. First real job he'd had. He used to talk about the girl he was saving up to marry." Evelyn did not say anything. "I know what people would say," Nathan said. "That it wasn't my fault. That attacks happen. That I couldn't have controlled the outcome even if I'd done everything right." His voice was flat and even, like he was reciting facts. "I know all of that. I've had 6 years to know it. And knowing it hasn't made it not hurt," she said. He looked at her, then, and something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not with any visible emotion, just a faint relaxation, as though something had been braced for impact that now found there was none coming. "No," he said, "it hasn't." "Then it sounds to me like you've been carrying something that was never entirely yours to carry," she said, "and moving hasn't put it down." "No," he said again. She folded the cloth he'd brought the food in and set it on the bench between them. "I don't think moving ever does," she said. "I think the only thing that puts those things down is time and the right kind of company." A pause. "In my experience." He looked at the folded cloth. He looked at her. He said quietly, "In your experience, Evelyn." The way he said her name. She had a good and well-developed defense against sentiment. She had needed one. 25 years in a town that had not seen her clearly had made her careful with herself, careful with what she let reach her. But the way Nathan Cole said her name without any particular drama, without anything added to it, just her name with the simple weight of a man who meant it was the kind of thing that went past the defense without even trying. She stood up and said, "You should get back. Don't you start on the eastern fence today?" "Tomorrow," he said. He stood too. "Same time tomorrow." She picked up the cloth and took it inside without answering, and he heard that as the yes it was, and she heard him walk around the side of the building toward the street, and she stood inside her shop in the afternoon quiet and breathed very carefully once. He started at Grayson's on Monday. She knew it from the simple fact that he did not come by at noon that day, and the bench behind the shop was quiet and entirely itself, and the absence was more noticeable than she had prepared herself for it to be. She told herself that was fine. It was fine. He came by Tuesday evening later than his usual times, and he looked tired in a clean physical way, tired from work, not from worry. And he sat in the chair inside the shop while she finished pinning a hem and told her about the ranch. The eastern pastures were in worse shape than he'd been told. The fence line hadn't been properly maintained for at least 2 seasons. The cattle were solid, but the men managing them were sloppy with their records. "Did you tell Grayson?" she asked. "I told his foreman," Nathan said. "Man named Reardon. He's decent, knows his work." "And Grayson himself?" "Haven't spoken to him directly yet," Nathan said. "He's not easy to approach." Evelyn set her pincushion down. "What did he say to you when you arrived?" Nathan's jaw shifted slightly. He said he expected his men to keep their personal lives from affecting their work, and he expected them to remember that on his property, his standards were what mattered. Evelyn looked at him. "He said that to you on your first day." "He was speaking generally," Nathan said, "to the group." "He was speaking to you," she said. "He knew who you were before you arrived. Someone told him." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "You think it was about you," I think William Grayson does not like things happening in his town that he did not arrange, she said. And a new man on his payroll spending his lunches with Evelyn Harper is the kind of thing that would feel to him like something that needed to be addressed. Nathan looked at her steadily. I'm not going to stop coming by. I didn't ask you to. I know, he said. I wanted to say it anyway. She picked her pincushion back up. You could cause yourself problems, she said. I've had problems before, he said. William Grayson's problems are different from most, she said. He has money and influence and he's very patient. He doesn't do things quickly. He does them thoroughly. Nathan leaned back slightly in the chair, wincing once when his ribs caught, and said, Tell me more about him. She told him what she knew, which was the version of William Grayson that Red Willow Creek had been constructing and revising for 20 years. How he had come from Denver with capital and connections and bought up land when it was cheap after a dry season. How he had made the right alliances with the county sheriff and the land office and the men who controlled the water rights along the creek. How he had not done anything anyone could prove was wrong, but how the pattern of who prospered in Red Willow Creek and who did not had a clear shape if you looked at it long enough. He has a daughter, she said. Clara. She's about my age. She came to my shop once 2 years ago for a dress fitting. She seemed kind, but she left quickly and she never came back, and I always thought it was because someone told her not to. Grayson told her. Almost certainly. Nathan was quiet, processing. He sounds like a man who needs everything around him to confirm his view of himself. That's exactly what he is, Evelyn said. And right now I am not confirming it simply by existing the way I exist. And you... She paused. You're making it worse. Good, Nathan said. She looked up sharply. I'm not saying I want to cause you trouble, he said. I'm saying that a man like that, the thing that worries him, is when people don't respond the way he expects. The way he controls a town is by everyone following the pattern he's laid down. His voice was measured. If the pattern gets interrupted, he gets unpredictable, Evelyn said. Or he gets more predictable, Nathan said. In an unpleasant direction. She looked at him. You've dealt with men like him before. I've worked for a few, he said, and I've watched what happens when someone challenges them without being ready for the response. Are you ready for it? He held her gaze. Are you... She thought about 25 years. She thought about the coin on the counter and the steadiness of her hand when she slid it back. She thought about walking straight back through a town that had decided her worth before she was old enough to have done anything to deserve or disprove it. I've been ready my whole life, she said. I just haven't always had anyone standing in the same direction. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, You do now. The words settled into the room. They did not require anything from her in that moment. No response, no reaction, no reciprocal declaration. They simply existed solid and plain, the way Nathan Cole did everything. She looked back at her hem. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not quite, but she was practiced at keeping that to herself. The following Saturday, she was in the middle of a fitting with young May Whitfield, 19 years old, preparing for her engagement party, when the shop door opened without the bell, which meant it had been pushed open hard and fast, and Rory Tate walked in. Rory Tate was 22 and worked for Grayson, and had the particular confidence of a young man who believed his employer's power was transferable. He stood in the door of the shop and looked at Evelyn with a grin that was not friendly and said, Mr. Grayson wants to know if you've been told that this road is getting rerouted. Evelyn lowered the pin she was holding. I haven't heard that, she said. He's putting it before the county board next month. They're moving the east road about 40 feet north. Rory's grin widened. Which would put it right through the front of your building. May Whitfield made a small sound. Evelyn looked at Rory Tate. That's county business, she said. When it goes before the board, I'll address it then. Just thought you'd want to know, Rory said. He looked around the shop with the lazy assessment of someone enjoying someone else's alarm. Nice little place you have here. Shame what change does to nice little places. "Rory," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "Get out of my shop," she said. "And next time you come through that door, knock first." His grin went flat. He looked at her for a moment, the look of a young man deciding whether to escalate and calculating the cost, and then he turned and left. The bell above the door did not ring this time either, because it had not been used correctly. May Whitfield, who had gone very pale, said, "Evelyn, is that true? Can he do that? Can Grayson move the road through your building?" Evelyn picked the pin back up. "County roads are county business," she said calmly. "Grayson can propose whatever he likes. It has to go through the board." "But Grayson owns half the board." "He influences half the board," Evelyn said. "That's different." She looked at May in the mirror. "Hold still, please." May held still. Her eyes were wide. "Aren't you frightened?" Evelyn pressed the pin carefully into the fabric. She thought about the answer honestly, the way she tried to think about most things. "A little," she said, "but frightened and helpless are different things, and I refuse to be both at once." That evening she locked up the shop and walked home, and she had been inside for barely 10 minutes when she heard footsteps on the porch, heavier than most, deliberate and familiar, and she opened the door before the knock landed. Nathan was standing there. His expression was the same as usual, contained, reading neutral from a distance, but there was something underneath it that she recognized now as the particular stillness of a man who was angry and had it under very firm control. "I heard," he said. "I expected you would," she said. "Come in." He came in. He did not sit down. He stood near the door with his hat in his hands and said, "Reardon told me what Grayson is doing. The road proposal, it's not real." "What do you mean?" "He's used it before. On other people he wants to pressure. He never follows through with the county board because it would cost him money and he doesn't want to spend it. But he floats the idea through someone like Rory Tate and watches what happens." He looked at her directly. "He wanted to see if you'd come to him. Come asking, come worried." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "And if I'd done that, then he'd know you could be managed," Nathan said. "And he'd keep using it." She looked at him. She looked at the flat, precise anger in his eyes that he was working to keep from becoming something louder. "You're angry," she said. "Yes," he said. "At Grayson. At the situation," he said. "At the fact that a man like that thinks he has the right to send someone like Rory Tate into your shop to scare you." His voice was even, entirely even. "At the fact that he's doing this because of me, because I've been coming here." "Stop," she said. He stopped. "This isn't because of you," she said. "William Grayson was going to find a reason to make my life difficult eventually. You're the occasion. You're not the cause." She held his gaze. "Do you understand the difference?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in him eased very slightly, just enough to be visible. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Now sit down and tell me everything Reardon told you, because I need to know exactly what Grayson is planning and how much time we have before it becomes something that can't be ignored." He sat down. He told her. Outside, Red Willow Creek moved through its Saturday evening, the saloon. The families on their porches, the last light dying over the western hills, and inside Evelyn Harper's small house. Two people who had both been careful and lonely for a long time sat together and talked about the thing coming toward them, and neither of them looked away from it, and neither of them looked away from each other. It was the most frightened Evelyn had been in years. It was also, she thought, the least alone she had felt in longer than that. The county board met on the first Tuesday of August, and Evelyn was there before the doors opened. She had spent the 2 weeks since Rory Tate's visit doing 3 things: sewing, which she did every day regardless of circumstance; gathering information, which she did quietly and through channels that people tended to underestimate; and preparing a document which she had written and rewritten 4 times until every word in it was exactly the word she meant. Nathan had helped with the information. Not by doing anything obvious. He understood instinctively that obvious help would give Grayson more ammunition, but by listening carefully during his weeks at the ranch, by noting which men talked to whom, by asking Reardon questions that seemed like practical ranch questions, and were beneath the surface something else entirely. What they had found was this: the road proposal was not, in fact, entirely hollow. Grayson had filed the preliminary paperwork. He had spoken to 2 of the 5 board members. He had not yet committed the money required for a formal survey, which meant he was still testing the water. But the framework was real, and if Evelyn did nothing, the framework would eventually become something solid. "He's waiting to see if you'll fold," Nathan had told her the Thursday before the meeting. "If you show up prepared and push back publicly, he loses momentum. If you don't show up, he takes it as permission to move forward." "Then I'll show up prepared," Evelyn had said, "and I'll bring people with me." The people she brought were more than anyone in Red Willow Creek had anticipated. Margaret Aldrich came because the road rerouting would affect her millinery shop as well, a fact Grayson had apparently not considered, or had considered, and dismissed, which amounted to the same failure. Tom Greer came because he owned the building that housed the post office 2 doors down and had the same exposure. Billy Reeves's father came because he had a long memory and a longer list of grievances against Grayson that had nothing to do with Evelyn and everything to do with water rights on the south pasture that had been quietly redirected 3 years ago. She had not organized them. She had simply told each one what she knew accurately and without embellishment and let them make their own decisions. It turned out that when people were given accurate information instead of rumor and implication, they made decisions that surprised the people who had counted on them remaining confused. Grayson was not at the meeting. He sent his lawyer, a man from Denver named Ashford, who wore a very good suit and had the particular confidence of someone who had never lost a county board argument in a small western town and did not expect to begin today. Ashford presented the road proposal with professional efficiency. Technical language survey references county development plans. He spoke for 12 minutes. He did not look at Evelyn. Then Evelyn stood up. She had 1 page of notes, but she barely looked at them. "The proposed rerouting," she said, "would require the demolition or significant structural modification of 4 businesses currently operating on the East Road. I represent one of them. The owners of the other 3 are present today." She looked at the board. The total assessed value of the properties affected is $4,800. The projected cost of the rerouting itself by the county's own standard rates for this type of work is approximately $6,200. She paused. "I'd like someone on the board to explain to the taxpayers of Red Willow Creek why they should spend $6,200 of county money to damage $4,800 of private property, and what public benefit justifies that arithmetic." The room was very quiet. One of the board members, Caldwell, the one Grayson had not spoken to, said, "Where did you get those figures, Miss Harper?" "From the county clerk's office," she said. "The survey rates are public record. The property assessments are public record. I simply read them." Ashford said smoothly, "The long-term benefits of the rerouting extend beyond simple cost comparison." "Then present them," Evelyn said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Present the specific quantified long-term benefits, not projections, not possibilities. Numbers with the sources that produce them." Ashford looked at her. For the first time since the meeting had started, he actually looked at her. "I'm not prepared to present that analysis today," he said. "Then perhaps the board could table this until you are," Evelyn said, and she sat back down. The board tabled it. Margaret Aldrich, walking out of the meeting beside Evelyn, said, "I have never seen someone do that to a Denver lawyer before." "He wasn't prepared," Evelyn said. "He didn't expect anyone to have read the public records." "Nobody usually does," Margaret said. "That's the problem," Evelyn said. She walked home feeling something she rarely let herself feel in its full unguarded form: satisfied. Not triumphant, she knew better than to mistake one successful meeting for a finished problem. But satisfied in the way of someone who had prepared well and done the thing they prepared to do and had it work. She had been home for perhaps an hour when she heard the boots on her porch. Not Nathan's different weight, different rhythm, too deliberate in a way that said the person was making a choice about how they sounded arriving at her door. She opened it. William Grayson stood on her porch. She had seen him from a distance many times. She had never had him this close. He was 60 years old and built like a man who had worked hard before he had money, and now used the memory of that work as evidence of his character. He had white hair and a broad face, and the kind of eyes that calculated everything they landed on. He was not angry. That was the first thing she noted. He was entirely deliberately calm. "Miss Harper," he said, "I wonder if you have a few minutes." "I have a few minutes," she said. She did not step aside to let him in. He seemed to note this. "I'd like to speak with you about this afternoon." "Then speak," she said. His eyes moved over her, not the way men's eyes usually moved over her with contempt or amusement, but with the focused assessment of someone revising a calculation he thought he'd already solved. "You're a capable woman," he said. "I underestimated the extent of it." "Most people do," she said. "I'd like to offer you a proposal," he said. "A real one. Not the road business that was preliminary, and you've made your position on it clear." A slight pause. "I have a need for someone with organizational skills and attention to detail. I'm expanding operations on the eastern property, and I need someone to manage the supply accounts. It's a salaried position. More than you earn here, I'd estimate." Evelyn looked at him. She let the silence run for 3 full seconds before she said, "Why would you offer me a job?" "Because you're clearly more competent than the people currently doing the work," he said. "That's one reason," she said. "What's the other one?" His expression did not change. "I prefer to have capable people working with me rather than against me." "I see," she said. "And what happens to Nathan Cole's employment if I take this position?" The question landed. She saw it land, the slight shift in his posture, the recalculation happening behind his eyes. "Mr. Cole's employment is unrelated to this conversation," he said. "Is it?" she said. It was not a question. "Miss Harper." "Mr. Grayson," she said, and her voice was exactly as even as his, and she made sure he could hear that she was doing it deliberately. "I appreciate the offer. I'm going to decline it. Not because I'm not capable of the work, and not because the salary wouldn't be useful, but because I know what the offer is for, and I'm not interested in being managed." She held his gaze without any difficulty. "My shop is not for sale. My time is not for sale. And my choices about who I associate with are entirely my own business." Grayson looked at her for a long moment. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "No," she said. "You're making it harder than it needs to be. I'm just declining to make it easier." He put his hat back on. He was still calm. She had to give him that. He was very controlled, but there was something underneath the calm now that hadn't been there at the start of the conversation. Not anger, not exactly. Something colder. "Good evening, Miss Harper," he said. "Good evening, Mr. Grayson," she said. She closed the door. She stood behind it and listened to his footsteps move off the porch and down the path, and when she could no longer hear them, she let out a slow breath and then stood there for another moment, hands flat at her sides, and thought clearly and carefully about what had just happened. He had come himself. That was significant. Men like William Grayson did not come themselves unless they had concluded that their intermediaries had failed, and that the situation required personal attention. Which meant Rory Tate's visit had failed, and the board meeting had failed, and now he had tried the offer, and that had failed too. 3 approaches in 2 weeks. He was moving faster than she'd expected. She needed to talk to Nathan. She was pulling her shawl off the hook by the door when she heard the knock. 2 measured knocks, familiar and immediate, and she opened the door, and Nathan was there, hat in hand, and he looked at her face and said, "He came here." "Yes. I saw him leave the ranch 2 hours ago, and I knew where he was going." He said it simply without apology for knowing her well enough to be right about it. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "Come in. I was just coming to find you." He came in and she told him everything. The offer, the exact words, the look in Grayson's eyes when she asked about Nathan's employment. Nathan listened without interrupting. He stood near the table with his arms crossed and his expression very still, and when she finished, he said, "He's not going to stop." "No," she said. "He isn't." The board meeting bought time. The offer failing buys more time. But he's the kind of man who sees a problem and solves it, and we've become a problem he can't solve the easy way. "What does he do?" she asked, "when the easy way doesn't work?" Nathan looked at her directly. "He finds out what someone cares about most," he said, "and he goes for that." The room went quiet. Outside, the evening sounds of Red Willow Creek drifted through the window. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a town that did not know and would not particularly care what was happening in Evelyn Harper's house. "The shop," she said. "The shop," he said. She had built that shop herself, not the building that had been her parents', but everything inside it, every piece of equipment, every client relationship, every reputation built over years of good work and fair dealing. It was the thing she had made when the town had tried to make her into nothing, and it was the most visible evidence she had that they had failed. "He can't do anything to it legally," she said. "I own the building outright. The road proposal is tabled. He has no grounds." "Not legal grounds," Nathan said, "but a man with Grayson's resources has other ways." He paused. "I need to tell you something I found out today, from Reardon." She looked at him. "Grayson has been buying up outstanding debts in Red Willow Creek for the past 18 months, Nathan said. "Small ones, personal loans, overdue accounts at the feed store, that kind of thing. He buys them quietly and he holds them." "Leverage," she said. "For when he needs people to do things," Nathan said, "or to stop doing things." She thought about the people who had come to the board meeting. Tom Greer and his building, Billy Reeves's father and his water rights, Margaret Aldrich and her millinery. "Does he have anything on any of the people who came today?" she asked. "Greer owes money on a note from 2 years ago," Nathan said. "The original lender sold it 6 months back. Reardon didn't know who bought it, but the timing lines up." Evelyn sat down. She sat carefully, the way you sat when the floor under you had shifted slightly, and you needed to establish where solid ground was. "So Greer is exposed," she said, "if Grayson calls the note. And if Greer pulls back from supporting me, Aldrich may follow," Nathan said. "And then you're standing alone again." She looked at the table. She thought about Greer, 50 years old. 3 kids, the building his father had left him, the note he'd taken out to repair the roof after the storm 2 winters ago. He was not a cowardly man, but he had more at stake than courage, and Grayson knew it. "What do we do?" she said. It was the first time she had said "we" to Nathan Cole out loud directly as a statement rather than an implication. She heard herself say it. She did not take it back. "I've been thinking about that," Nathan said. He pulled the second chair out and sat across from her the way he sat when they were going to talk about something real. "Grayson's leverage only works if people don't know he has it. The moment Greer knows that Grayson holds his note, Grayson loses the surprise. He can still call the note, but Greer can start preparing." "You want me to tell Greer?" "I want you to decide whether to tell Greer," Nathan said. "It's your situation, your choice." She looked at him. "What would you do?" "Tell him," he said. "Because I'd rather face something prepared than be blindsided by it. But I'm not Tom Greer, and I don't have a family depending on a building." She thought about it for exactly 40 seconds. "I'll tell him tomorrow morning," she said, "before the shop opens." Nathan nodded. "And the shop itself," she said. "What's he likely to try? Supply interruption, maybe. If he has influence with the freight companies. Or—" Nathan stopped. "Or what? Fire," he said. "I don't think he'd do it. It's too visible and too illegal, and he's too careful for that. But I want you to know I've thought about it." The word landed cold. She made herself hold it without flinching. "What do I do about that?" "Nothing much to do," he said, "except not keep anything irreplaceable in the shop that you'd lose forever." He paused. "Your patterns, your account books. Bring copies home." She had not thought about the patterns. She had a decade of patterns in that shop, every alteration she'd made, every measurement she'd taken, every design she'd developed. They were how she worked. They were how she knew what she knew. "I'll start tonight," she said. They spent the next 2 hours going through what she needed to protect and what could be rebuilt. Nathan had a methodical mind. She had known this about him for weeks, but watching it applied to something this specific and urgent showed her a quality of it she hadn't seen before. He asked questions, and he listened to the answers, and he found the gaps between them, and he never once told her what she ought to feel about any of it. When they had been through everything, she made coffee, and they sat with it, and the fire had burned low, and she looked at him across the table and said, "I want to ask you something." "All right," he said. "When Grayson called you into his office," she said, "the first week, what did he say to you about me?" Nathan looked at her steadily. He said that Red Willow Creek was a well-ordered town, and he intended to keep it that way. He said men on his payroll were expected to conduct their personal associations with discretion. He paused. And he said that some people in town had a way of making themselves the center of situations that were better left quiet. Evelyn absorbed this. "He meant me." "Yes." "And what did you say?" "I said I'd keep my work at the quality he expected," Nathan said. "And I thanked him for the information." She almost smiled. "That's not an answer." "That's the answer I gave him," Nathan said. "Because he wasn't asking a question he deserved a real answer to." He looked at her. "The real answer is that I don't allow employers to dictate who I know or who I eat lunch with, and I've never done it before, and I wasn't going to start." Evelyn looked at her coffee cup. She looked at the fire. She looked at her hands, which were on the table, and which were entirely steady. "Nathan," she said, "yes. If this gets worse, and I think it will before it gets better, I don't want you to feel that you owe me anything. You came to this town for a job. A stable job. Something that would let you stop moving." She looked at him. "I'm not going to be the reason you lose that." He was quiet for long enough that she heard the fire settle. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes. I stopped moving the week I got here," he said. "That's not about the job." She looked at him. "That's about the bench behind your shop," he said. "And the coffee in the morning. And the way you talk to Billy Reeves without making him feel small." He held her gaze without any effort that she could see. "That's about you. And I need you to understand that I am exactly where I chose to be, and I knew what I was choosing when I chose it." The room was very quiet. "All right," she said finally. Her voice was not entirely steady, but it was close enough. "All right," he said. She told Tom Greer the next morning at 7, standing on his front porch before she went to the shop. He went through 3 separate expressions in the space of a minute: disbelief, then the particular sick recognition of a man whose worst fear has just been confirmed, then something harder and quieter. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm not sure he has the note," she said. "But the timeline fits and Reardon's description fits. I think it's likely." Greer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father built that building." "I know," she said. "And I have 3 kids, Evelyn. I can't lose it." "I know," she said again. "I'm not asking you to risk it. I'm telling you what I know so you can decide for yourself, without being blindsided." She looked at him. "Whatever you decide, Tom, I understand it." He looked at her. He looked at the road. He said, "Does Cole know?" "He told me," she said. Greer nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep my shop open," she said. "And I'm going to be ready for whatever comes next." She went to the shop and opened it and worked through the morning. At noon, Nathan came, and they ate on the bench, and she told him about Greer, and Nathan said, "How did he take it?" And she said he took it honestly, which Nathan accepted as sufficient. The trouble when it came did not come from Grayson directly. It came from Rory Tate at noon on a Wednesday, and it came in a form that was worse than the road proposal, worse than the job offer, worse than anything that could be argued before a board or deflected with public record numbers. Rory Tate walked into the shop while Evelyn was in the back with a customer. He walked in, and May Whitfield was at the counter, picking up her finished engagement dress, and two other women were looking at fabric samples. And Rory stood in the middle of the shop and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mr. Grayson wants it known that any business that keeps company with Harper's is subject to review of its county operating permits." Everything stopped. May Whitfield's face went white. The two women with the fabric samples looked at each other and then set the samples down. Evelyn came out from the back room and looked at Rory Tate and at the faces of the women in her shop and understood exactly what had just happened and what it was designed to do. "Rory," she said. "Just passing along a message," he said. He had learned since the last time not to grin, but the flatness of his expression was worse. "Get out," she said. "I'm a paying customer." "You haven't paid for anything," she said. "You've come in here twice now as a messenger, and both times I've asked you to leave, and this time I'm going to add that if you come in a third time, I'll have the sheriff here before you've finished your sentence." Rory left. But the damage was already done, because the two women with the fabric samples left with him, not right behind him, not obviously, but within 2 minutes, with the apologetic haste of people who had decided that being associated with Evelyn Harper had just become a financial risk they could not afford. May Whitfield stayed. She picked up her dress from the counter and held it to her chest and looked at Evelyn and said, "What does that mean?" "Operating permits? It means Grayson has enough influence with the county office to create delays and complications for businesses he targets," Evelyn said. She kept her voice level because May did not need to bear the weight of her anger right now. "It doesn't mean he can shut anyone down without cause. It means he can make it expensive and difficult." "Are you going to be all right?" "Yes," Evelyn said. And then because May was 19 and had an honest face and deserved the truth, "I don't know yet what all right is going to look like, but I'll still be here." May left. Evelyn locked the front door, which she had never done in the middle of a workday in 10 years of running the shop. She stood in the empty locked shop, and she breathed once very slowly, and she let herself feel the thing she had been refusing to feel for the last 2 hours. It rose up fast and it was large, and it was familiar, the specific exhausting weight of being targeted by someone powerful, the way it made the ground uncertain under everything you'd built. She had spent 25 years making this shop into something solid, into proof, and now someone was trying to make it uncertain again, not because of anything she had done wrong, but because she had refused to be managed. Her hands tightened at her sides. Then she unlocked the door and went back to work. Nathan was there in 20 minutes. She had not sent for him. He simply appeared the way he had started to appear when things happened, and she thought later that it was one of the things she would remember. Not that he always came, but that he always came before she had to ask. "I heard," he said. "Of course you did," she said. She was pressing a seam flat with unnecessary force. "Half the town heard." "Evelyn?" "I'm fine," she said. "You're angry." "Yes," she said. "I am angry. I am very angry, and I have been angry since I was 12 years old, and people in this town decided what I was worth before I opened my mouth, and I've been managing it all this time, but today—" She stopped. She set the iron down before she did something irreversible with it. "Today, he walked into my shop. Through my customers. He used my customers to get to me." Her voice was even, but the evenness was costing her. "That is mine. That shop is mine. Those women who come in there, that's the one place in Red Willow Creek where I have never had to prove anything to anyone, and he walked his errand boy in there and tried to take that from me." Nathan was very still. He was watching her with an attention that had nothing clinical about it. It was the attention of someone who understood what was being said beneath what was being said, and who was making a decision. He said, "We're not going to let him." "Nathan." "No," he said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard from him before. Not loudness, because Nathan Cole rarely needed volume, but a kind of bedrock certainty, like something below the surface that had always been there, and had decided now was the time to be visible. "He's gone after your shop, after your customers. That's over. It stops here." She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell William Grayson," Nathan said. that he can do whatever he likes with my employment. He can keep me on or let me go, and it makes no difference to what happens next. And then I'm going to tell him something else. What? Nathan looked at her steadily. That the people of Red Willow Creek have had enough time to figure out that the only thing threatening the order of this town is the man who keeps claiming to protect it. He paused. And that this is the last errand Rory Tate runs into your shop or into the shop of anyone who does business with you. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at the certainty in his face, which was not bravado. She had seen bravado, and she knew the difference, but was the particular quiet of a man who had thought something through to its conclusion and had stopped being uncertain. He'll fire you, she said. Probably, he said. Nathan, that's your... Evelyn? He said her name the way he always said it, with that careful, complete intention. I came to this town looking for a place to stop moving. I've found it. It's not the job. He looked at her. It was never the job. She looked at him for a long time, long enough to be certain of what she was looking at. Then she said, "Don't go to Grayson tonight." He waited. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Give me tonight to think. I want us to go in prepared, not just angry." "All right," he said. She picked up a piece of mending from the pile and turned back to her table. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "You should know," she said without looking up, "that when I say us, I mean it." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. Outside, Red Willow Creek was going about its ordinary evening, entirely unaware that the woman everyone had spent 25 years underestimating had just decided she was done being patient, and that the quiet cowboy who had come through on a hot July afternoon with cracked ribs and 3 days' stubble had decided that wherever this ended, he was going to be standing beside her when it did. Grayson would find that out soon enough. The whole town would. She did not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table until past midnight, with her account books open and her pattern copies stacked beside them, and a cup of tea that went cold before she drank half of it. And she thought. Not in circles. She had never been a circular thinker, had trained herself out of it early, because circular thinking was a luxury she could not afford, but in the straight, deliberate lines of someone mapping terrain before crossing it. What she had: a shop with no outstanding debts, a building she owned outright, a decade of client relationships, most of which were genuine. Public records she had already read and understood. One man who had said us and meant it. What Grayson had: money, influence, patience, and 20 years of a town that had learned it was easier to go along with him than against him. What Grayson did not have proof of anything. Not yet. Everything he had done so far was pressure, implication, the careful use of fear as a substitute for legal force. The road proposal was tabled. The job offer was declined. The permit threat was exactly that, a threat with nothing behind it yet, because Evelyn's shop was current on every fee and filing the county required, and she had checked twice. He was trying to make her feel surrounded. He was not wrong that she was surrounded, but surrounded and defeated were different things, and she intended to keep them that way. At 12:30, she closed the account books and went to bed, and she slept 4 hours, which was enough. She was at Nathan's boarding house at 6 in the morning. She had never gone there before. She knocked twice and waited, and he opened the door in his work clothes, with his hair uncombed, and his eyes already awake in the way of a man who does not need much time between sleeping and thinking. And he looked at her and said, "You have a plan." "I have the beginning of one," she said. "Can I come in?" He stepped back. She came in and sat down and told him what she'd worked out in the night, and he listened the way he always listened, entirely without interrupting, without preparing his response while she was still speaking. When she finished, he said, "The land office records. If Grayson has been buying up debts and redirecting water rights and filing road proposals, there's a paper trail," she said. "Not one document. A pattern. And patterns in public records are public." "You'd need someone who knows how to read land filings," Nathan said. "I know how to read them well enough," she said. "But I'd need time in the office, and I'd need someone to help me organize what I find." She looked at him. "Reardon." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "He's a decent man," Evelyn said. "You said so yourself." And if Grayson has been doing what we think he's been doing with the water rights on the south pasture, Reardon has been watching it happen from close range for years. He may have more than we think. If Grayson finds out Reardon helped us, Reardon loses his job, Evelyn said. I know. That's why you have to ask him, not me. He has to decide what it's worth to him. Nathan looked at her steadily. You've thought about all of this. I had 4 hours, she said. I used them. He almost smiled. Then he stood and poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot on the small stove, and brought them to the table, and sat back down, and they went through the rest of it together, the timing, the approach, the order of operations. Nathan thought in sequences. She thought in structures. Between them, in the space of 40 minutes, they built something that had the shape of a real strategy. At 7:15, Nathan left for the ranch. At 7:30, Evelyn opened her shop. By 8 o'clock, 3 of her regular customers had not come in, which was unusual for a Thursday morning. By 9, she understood why a woman named Bernice Hooper, who was not a client, but who had an expansive social reach and a close relationship with Grayson's housekeeper, had apparently spent Wednesday evening visiting people and mentioning carefully and with the air of genuine concern that the county had flagged Harper's fine alterations for a permit review. It was not true. But Bernice Hooper's mentions had the particular velocity of information that traveled as rumor, which is to say, they moved faster than fact and arrived in people's minds pre-interpreted. By 10 o'clock, one of the women who had come in to pick up a finished order mentioned it tentatively, like someone testing ice. Evelyn, I heard there might be some trouble with your permits. There's no trouble with my permits, Evelyn said. She handed the woman her package. Everything is current and filed. If you'd like to verify that the county clerk's office is 2 streets over, and they can confirm it in 5 minutes. The woman looked relieved. She also looked like someone who would tell 2 other people what Evelyn had just said, which was exactly what Evelyn needed her to do. By 11, Margaret Aldrich appeared in the connecting doorway between their shops. They had a door that was usually kept politely closed and equally politely used, and said, Bernice Hooper told Eleanor Vance that Eleanor's niece's wedding dress order might be affected by whatever's happening with your licenses. Eleanor's niece's wedding dress will be finished on schedule, Evelyn said. The dress is 90% complete, and the licenses are unaffected, because there is nothing wrong with the licenses. I know that, Margaret said. I'm telling you what's being said. What's being said is exactly what someone wanted said, Evelyn said. The goal is to make clients nervous enough to cancel orders before they confirm whether any of it is true. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Is this Grayson? Who else? Evelyn said. Margaret's expression did something complicated and resolved into something firmer than Evelyn usually saw from her. What do you need? If anyone asks you directly, tell them the truth as you know it, Evelyn said. That's enough. That's not very much, Margaret said. Honest people telling true things in a town that's been fed a rumor is more than it sounds like, Evelyn said. Margaret went back to her hats. Evelyn went back to Eleanor Vance's niece's wedding dress, which was 90% complete and would be 100% complete by Friday if she had anything to say about it. At noon, Nathan did not come. She had known he might not. He was at the ranch talking to Reardon, and that conversation would take the time it took. She ate alone on the bench and was aware of the absence, and was also aware that being aware of the absence meant something about how the last several weeks had changed the ordinary shape of her days, and she filed that awareness where she filed most things that needed to be thought about later and not now. At 2 in the afternoon, Tom Greer came into the shop. He came in with the particular purpose of a man who has made a decision and arrived to implement it, and he stood at the counter and said, I looked into the note. Evelyn put down what she was doing. And, It's Grayson, Greer said. His jaw was set. Third-party company out of Denver, but I traced the paperwork. It's him. I'm sorry, Tom. Don't be sorry yet. He put both hands on the counter. He bought it 8 months ago. The original term is up in 14 months. He hasn't called it early, which means he's holding it for leverage, not for the money. He looked at her. If I pay it off before he uses it, he loses the leverage, and he spent good money for nothing. Evelyn looked at him. Can you pay it off? Not alone, Greer said. But my brother in Albuquerque has offered before. I never wanted to ask him. He paused. I'm asking him. She looked at him for a moment. Tom. He doesn't get to hold it over my head, Greer said. My father built that building. My kids grew up in it. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was a choice. And I'm done letting William Grayson make choices for me about what I can risk. She reached across the counter and put her hand over his for a moment, and he let her, and then he nodded once and left, and she watched him go with something in her chest that was warm and complicated and grateful. By 4 o'clock, 3 of the morning's absent customers had returned. By 5, word had apparently made it through enough of the town's conversational network that the permit story had been compared against the verifiable fact of Evelyn's current filings, and the comparison had not been kind to Bernice Hooper's credibility. Evelyn knew this because May Whitfield came by at 5:15 with a jar of preserves and the information that her mother, who was not a political woman by nature, had gone to Bernice Hooper's house personally to ask where she'd gotten her information and had come away satisfied that there was none. Mama doesn't do things like that usually, May said. What made her this time? Evelyn asked. May looked at the preserves. She said Bernice Hooper has been spreading half-truths about people in this town for 20 years, and nobody's ever asked her to account for them. And Mama said she was tired of it. Evelyn set the preserves on the shelf behind the counter. Tell your mother thank you, she said. Nathan came at 6 after the shop was closed. He came around to the back and knocked, and she let him in through the workroom, and she could see from the way he moved and the particular set of his face that the conversation with Riordan had gone further than expected. Sit down, she said. He sat. He put a folded paper on the table between them. Riordan kept records, he said. She looked at the paper. What kind of records? The kind a careful man keeps when he works for someone he doesn't entirely trust, Nathan said. Dates, amounts, descriptions of transactions he was asked to facilitate. Nothing signed. Nothing official, but specific. Mofu o business. He paused. Evelyn the water rights on the south pasture. Grayson didn't just redirect them. He filed falsified documentation with the county land office claiming the original water rights holder had sold them voluntarily. The original holder was a man named Cabrera who had 40 acres east of the creek. He didn't sell. He was pressured off the land. Riordan was there. He watched it happen. The room was very quiet. Riordan didn't do anything at the time, Nathan said. He wants you to know that. He's carried it. He paused. He's willing to make a statement to the county land commissioner, not the sheriff. He doesn't trust the local sheriff, and I think he's right not to. The land commissioner's office is in Tucson. Evelyn looked at the folded paper. She looked at Nathan. If Riordan makes a statement, Grayson will know it was him. Yes, Nathan said, and Riordan's worked for Grayson for 11 years. He knows that, Nathan said. He made the choice. She put her hand flat on the table, not on the paper, but beside it, as though steadying herself against the weight of what it contained. This changes things, she said. Yes, Nathan said. It's not about the shop anymore. No, he said. It isn't. She thought about the Cabrera family, a name she hadn't known this morning attached to 40 acres. She hadn't known existed belonging to people who had been pushed off their land by a falsified document, while the town of Red Willow Creek went about its business and didn't ask questions. She thought about how many years that had been sitting in the land office filed and official and wrong. I need to go to Tucson, she said. We need to go to Tucson, Nathan said. She looked at him. She didn't argue with the we this time. He'll know, she said. The moment we're not here, he'll know something has moved. Probably, Nathan said. But it takes 2 days to ride to Tucson. He can't get ahead of a statement that's already been made. We'd have to move fast. Tomorrow morning, he said. Early, before the town is up. She looked at the paper on the table. She thought about William Grayson standing on her porch, calm and controlled, offering her a salary to manage his accounts. She thought about Rory Tate's flat expression. She thought about the two women who had set down the fabric samples and left. She thought about the Cabrera family. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning." They left at 5 before the light was full. Nathan on his horse, and Evelyn in her small wagon with the folded paper in her bag, and Reardon's written account, carefully worded, dated, signed in a leather case that Nathan was carrying, because it was less likely to be connected to her. Reardon had not come with them. He would remain at the ranch doing his work, giving nothing away until the statement was in Tucson, and in the hands of someone who could act on it. That was his choice, made clearly, and without apparent hesitation, and Evelyn had respected it without pressing him. The road to Tucson was long, and the July heat was already building by mid-morning, and they rode in the easy companionship of people who were past the stage of needing to fill silence. She drove the wagon and he rode beside it, and sometimes they talked, and sometimes they didn't, and the miles moved under them. Around mid-morning, Nathan said, "Tell me about your parents." She glanced at him. "What made you think of that? You said the building was theirs. I've been curious." She considered it. "My father was a tailor," she said. "He came from Ohio with my mother and a sewing machine, and the idea that people in the West needed someone who could make clothes that fit. He was right." She watched the road. "He taught me everything I know about fabric and needlework. My mother taught me the business side. She kept the books." A pause. "They were both gone by the time I was 19. Fever 2 winters in a row." "I'm sorry," Nathan said. "I had the shop and the building and their tools and the clients who trusted them enough to trust me," she said. "I've always thought they gave me what I needed, deliberately before they knew they needed to." She paused. "My mother told me once that the most important thing she could give a daughter in a world like this was the ability to make something valuable out of her own hands, so nobody could take it from her." Nathan rode in silence for a moment. "She sounds like she knew what she was talking about." "She did," Evelyn said. "She usually did." They reached Tucson the following afternoon. The land commissioner's office was on the west end of the central street, a building that smelled like old paper and ink, staffed by 2 clerks and a commissioner named Aldous Webb, who had been in the position for 9 years and had the face of a man who had seen most things and was not easily surprised. He was surprised by Reardon's account. Not dramatically. He read it twice, asked 4 questions, looked at the dates, looked at the supporting documentation Evelyn had gathered from the public records in Red Willow Creek, the original water rights filing the subsequent transfer document with its suspicious date, the discrepancies she had identified between Grayson's filing and the county survey records from that year. And he set everything down and looked at the 2 of them across his desk. "Miss Harper," he said, "where did you learn to read land filings?" "From the county clerk's office records," she said. "I borrowed the relevant statutes and studied them." "When?" "Over the last 2 weeks," she said. He looked at Nathan. "And you're currently employed by Grayson?" "As of this morning, I don't believe that's still the case," Nathan said. "He'll have found out I'm gone by now." Webb tapped the documents with 1 finger. "This is a serious allegation. Falsifying land transfer documents is a federal land office violation." "I know," Evelyn said. "That's why we brought it here, rather than to the county sheriff." "The county sheriff is on good terms with Grayson," Webb said, not as a question. "Yes," she said. He looked at the documents again. He was quiet long enough that she could hear the clerks moving in the outer office and the sound of horses on the street outside and the particular held breath quality of a moment that was going to resolve one way or another and could not be pushed. Then he said, "I'm going to need to send an investigator to Red Willow Creek." She exhaled very slowly. "How long will that take?" 2 weeks minimum, possibly 3. He looked at her over the documents. "Miss Harper, I want to be honest with you. Even with this documentation, a case against a man with Grayson's resources and connections will take time. He will have lawyers. He will dispute every piece of this. And in the meantime, he'll know something has happened, and he'll try to respond," she said. "Yes, I understand that." "Are you prepared for that?" She looked at the documents on his desk, the weeks of work, The public records she'd read by lamplight, Riordan's careful account of things he'd watched happen and carried for 11 years, the arithmetic she'd done at the county board meeting, that had made Ashford the Denver lawyer look unprepared for the first time in his career. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I've been prepared my whole life. I just finally have something worth preparing for." Webb looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I'll send my best man." They rode back to Red Willow Creek in the early morning quiet and arrived in the afternoon of the second day, and Nathan saw her to her door, and she turned on the porch and said, "He'll have done something while we were gone." "Yes," Nathan said. "You should go to the ranch, find out what—" "Not yet," he said. He was looking at her with that focused attention. "Are you all right?" She thought about answering quickly, which was her instinct, and then she didn't. "I'm tired," she said. "And I'm not sure what comes next, and I don't like not knowing what comes next." "That's honest," he said. "I try to be," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Evelyn." "Yes, what you did in that office," he said. "Webb has been in that position for 9 years. He's seen people come in with complaints about powerful men, and he's sent most of them away without much. You walked in with documentation he couldn't dismiss and a presentation he couldn't find a hole in." She looked at him. "Nathan, I'm not flattering you," he said. "I'm telling you what I saw. Because I think you've been in a town for 25 years that decided not to see you, and I want you to understand that what you just did was remarkable, and it came entirely from you." She stood on her porch and felt that land somewhere important, the way a true thing landed differently from a kind thing, even when both were welcome. "Thank you," she said, and meant it all the way down. "Get some rest," he said. He put his hat on. "I'll come by in the morning." He left, and she went inside, and she did not sit at the table this time. She went directly to bed, and she slept, and her sleep was not the light, uncertain sleep of the last several weeks, but something deeper and more settled, the sleep of someone who has done the thing they went to do, and now, for however long the hours allow, can set it down. She was opening the shop the next morning when Margaret Aldrich appeared at her door before the hour. Margaret's face was the face of someone carrying news that had been burning since the night before. "Evelyn," she said, "Grayson's daughter was here yesterday." Evelyn stilled. "Clara Grayson came here." "To the millinery," Margaret said. "She came to me. She said—" Margaret stopped and looked like she was choosing her words. "She said she came to return something she'd been meaning to return for 2 years. She left money. For the dress fitting you did for her in '83. She said you charged her half price because you said the fabric was difficult, and it wasn't her fault the fabric was difficult, and she's been meaning to pay the rest ever since, and she was sorry it took so long." Evelyn stared at her. "That's why she came?" "That's what she said," Margaret said. "But Evelyn, she also said something else. She said to tell you that her father doesn't know everything that happens on his property, and that not everyone who works for him does it because they agree with him." The shop was very quiet. "She knows about Riordan," Evelyn said. "I think she might know about more than Riordan," Margaret said. Evelyn picked up her keys. She looked at the door of her shop, the sign in steady black letters across the glass, her name, everything she had made. "She's been waiting," she said, "for someone to do exactly what we did." "It looks that way," Margaret said. She came. Clara Grayson came to the shop at 10 o'clock, and she was not the woman Evelyn had seen for that brief fitting 2 years ago, or rather, she was but more visible now, less contained. She was 30 years old, with her father's eyes and something in her posture that said she had spent a long time deciding what to do with the things she knew. She sat in the chair near the window, the chair for people who were waiting without being in a hurry, and she said, "I heard you went to Tucson." "Word travels fast," Evelyn said. "My father heard last night," Clara said. "He's not calm." "Is he going to move against the shop?" "He's thinking about it," Clara said. "But I need to tell you something before he does." Evelyn put her work down. She gave Clara Grayson her full attention. "The Cabrera family," Clara said. "They didn't just leave. My father had the sheriff at the time tell them there had been a survey error and their acreage was smaller than they'd been told. By the time they got a lawyer to look at it, the new filing was already recorded, and my father's name was on it. She paused. I was 18. I was in the room when the lawyer explained to my father what he'd done and how to make it stay done. Evelyn looked at her. You've known for 12 years. Yes, Clara said. Her voice was even, but it was costing her the same way Evelyn's evenness sometimes cost her. I was 18, and I didn't know what to do with it, and then I was 20, and I still didn't, and then I was 30, and I understood that there is never a good time, and there is never a safe moment, and that waiting for one is just a different kind of choice. Are you willing to make a statement? Evelyn asked. I'm willing to make a statement, Clara said. I've already written it. She reached into the bag on her arm and produced an envelope. I'd like you to hold it. I don't trust it to stay in my possession once my father understands what's happening. Evelyn took the envelope. She held it with both hands. She looked at the young woman in her chair, William Grayson's daughter, carrying 12 years of a secret that had been slowly making her into someone she didn't want to be, and she felt the weight of it and the courage of what it had taken to bring it here. He'll know it came from you, Evelyn said. Your own father. Yes, Clara said. He will. A pause. Are you safe? Evelyn asked. Clara looked at her with something in her eyes that might have been surprise and might have been relief. He's not that kind of man, she said. He's cruel in the ways that are convenient and costless to him. He won't be physical about it. She paused. He'll be cold. For a very long time. And that will be its own kind of hard. I know, Evelyn said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Clara said. You gave me a reason to stop waiting. She stood. She smoothed her skirt in a gesture that was entirely her father's, composed, deliberate, and then she looked at Evelyn and said, My mother always said this town deserved better than what it got from my father. I think she was right. She left. Evelyn stood with the envelope in both hands and thought about 12 years and about 18-year-old girls in rooms with lawyers and about all the different ways a person could be surrounded and still not be defeated. Nathan came at noon. She showed him the envelope and told him what Clara had said, and he sat very still through all of it, and when she finished he said, It's enough. Yes, she said. I think it is. Webb's investigator comes in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, she said. Grayson will try something before then, Nathan said. Almost certainly, she said. And she looked at the envelope. She looked at her shop. She looked at Nathan Cole, who had arrived in July with cracked ribs and 3 days' stubble, and had stayed not because the job asked it of him, not because anyone had made it convenient, but because he had walked into the specific gravity of this place and this woman, and had decided that wherever it went, he was going there too. And we'll be ready, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. We will. Grayson moved on a Friday. Evelyn had known it would be a Friday, not because she had any specific information, but because she had spent 4 weeks learning how William Grayson operated, and William Grayson was a man who liked to create problems at the end of a week when offices were closing and people were tired, and the gap between Friday evening and Monday morning was long enough to do damage that couldn't be immediately addressed. She had told Nathan this on Thursday evening, sitting on the bench behind the shop in the last of the daylight, and he had nodded and said, What do you want to do about it? And she had said, Stay open late tomorrow, and make sure Reardon knows to be reachable. What she had not anticipated was the specific shape it would take. She was in the middle of a fitting at 2 in the afternoon. Mrs. Caldwell, the wife of the board member who had asked about Evelyn's figures at the county meeting, a woman who had come in for the first time 2 weeks ago and had since brought 3 orders when Rory Tate came through the door. Not alone this time. He had 2 men with him she didn't recognize, not ranch hands, something else, the kind of men who traveled with someone else's money in their pockets and did the kind of work that didn't get written down. Evelyn looked at the 3 of them. She looked at Mrs. Caldwell, whose face had gone carefully neutral in the way of a woman who understood immediately that something was happening and was deciding how to respond to it. Mrs. Caldwell. Evelyn said, her voice entirely level. Would you mind waiting in the back workroom for just a few minutes? There's a chair by the pressing table. Mrs. Caldwell looked at the three men. She looked at Evelyn. I'll stay right here, she said, and sat down in the chair by the window with the deliberate settling of a woman who had decided to be a witness. Evelyn turned to Rory. What is it this time? Rory held up a paper. Notice of outstanding debt, he said. You owe $47 to the Merchant Credit Association of Denver. Debt was purchased and is now called due immediately. Evelyn looked at the paper. She did not take it. I have no account with any Merchant Credit Association, she said. In Denver or elsewhere. Account was opened in your name in April of last year, Rory said. Goods purchased against the account. Balance outstanding. That's not possible, she said. I have never opened a credit account in Denver. Paper says different, Rory said, and now the flatness of his expression had a thin satisfaction underneath it, the look of someone who has been waiting to deliver something and is finally delivering it. Mrs. Caldwell spoke from the chair. May I see that document? Rory looked at her. The satisfaction thinned. It ain't addressed to you, Mrs. Caldwell. No, Mrs. Caldwell said, but I'm looking at it anyway. My husband is on the county board and he takes a particular interest in fraudulent debt instruments, which this appears to be. She held out her hand. Rory did not give her the paper. But the two men behind him shifted, and something in the room changed the particular change that happened when the advantage in a situation moved without anyone acknowledging that it had moved. Evelyn said, You can tell Mr. Grayson that I'll be at the county clerk's office first thing Monday morning with a request to examine any debt filings made in my name in the last 18 months. If a fraudulent account has been opened in my name, that's a matter for the territorial court, not a private notice delivered by... She looked at the two men, whoever these gentlemen are. Rory held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he folded the paper and put it back in his jacket and walked out. And the two men went with him, and the bell above the door rang clean and sharp in the silence they left behind. Mrs. Caldwell stood up from the chair. Evelyn, she said. I'm sorry you saw that, Evelyn said. I'm not, Mrs. Caldwell said. My husband is going to hear about this tonight. She picked up her bag. James has been willing to give Grayson benefit of the doubt on most things. I don't think he'll be willing after this. She left without finishing the fitting, but she came back the next morning at 8 to do so, which told Evelyn everything she needed to know about where James Caldwell's wife had decided to stand. Nathan arrived at the shop at 3:20 minutes after Rory had left, and Evelyn had already written down everything she remembered about the two men: height, approximate age, the cut of their clothes, the way they held themselves. She handed it to Nathan when he walked through the door. He read it. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. Hired men, he said. Not from here. No, she said. He brought in outside people. Nathan looked at the paper. That's not caution. That's escalation. I know, she said, which means he's closer to the edge than we thought. Or he knows we went to Tucson and he's trying to move faster than Webb's investigator. She had thought of that. Both things can be true, she said. He looked at her. Are you all right? Mrs. Caldwell sat in that chair and refused to leave, she said. An hour ago I would have said I was frightened. Right now I feel... She stopped and chose the word carefully. Steadied. Good, he said. Nathan, the false debt, that's fraud. That's criminal, not civil. Yes, he said. If he's willing to file a fraudulent debt instrument, he's past the point of careful, she said. He's getting desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, Nathan said. Desperate men also do damage on their way to making mistakes, she said. I don't want to wait for the mistake if there's something we can do now. He nodded slowly. Reardon, he said. He needs to know about the outside men. If Grayson brought hired men in, Reardon will know who authorized the payment. Can he find out by tonight? He's been paying attention for 11 years, Nathan said. He can find out by tonight. He left. She locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and went to the back workroom and sat down at the pressing table and let herself be still for 5 minutes. Just 5. She counted them. Then she stood up and went back to work. Reardon's information came at 8 that evening, delivered in person. He came to her back door. She had told Nathan she expected this, and had left the workroom lamp on, and he sat at her work table and told her what he had found. The two men were from a firm in Denver called Hargrove Associates. They did debt collection process serving, and what Reardon described with careful understatement as other services for private clients. Grayson had used them twice before, once 8 years ago, once 4 years ago. Reardon knew about both occasions because he had driven the payment himself in cash to a relay rider at the East County line. He paid cash both times, Nathan said. He was standing near the door, arms crossed. Yes, Reardon said. Which means there is no direct paper trail from Grayson to Hargrove for those engagements. But you saw the payments, Evelyn said. You were there. I was there, Reardon said. He looked at her steadily. I can describe the amounts, the dates, the location, and the man who collected. I can describe what I was told the payment was for. He paused. I don't know if that's enough. It might be enough for Webb's investigator, she said, combined with everything else. There's something else, Reardon said. He reached into his jacket and produced a small folded paper. I found this in Grayson's office this afternoon. In the correspondence he'd left out, he didn't know I was in there, and I was only in there because he'd asked me to leave a supply count on his desk. He set the paper on the table. I shouldn't have read it. I read it. Evelyn unfolded the paper. It was a letter. One paragraph in a hand she didn't recognize, addressed to Grayson. It referenced the Hargrove firm, a timeline of 4 days, and a phrase that was written in the careful, distanced language of people who did not want to write certain words directly. The situation on the East Road should be resolved through property, not process. Through property, not process. She looked up. He's not trying to file the road proposal, she said. He's going to damage the building. The room went very still. Not fire, Nathan said immediately. He's too careful for fire, but structural damage, something that makes the building unusable enough to require demolition. He looked at Reardon. When? The 4-day timeline in that letter was dated Wednesday, Reardon said. Wednesday. Today was Friday. Tonight or tomorrow, Evelyn said. Tonight, Nathan said. Before Monday, when the office is open. She stood up. She thought about her patterns, her account books already copied and stored at home. She thought about the equipment, the bolts of fabric in the storeroom, a decade of accumulated tools and materials. She thought about the sign across the front glass with her name in steady black letters. I'm not leaving the building empty tonight, she said. Nathan looked at her. Evelyn, it's my building, she said. And I'm not going to sit in my house and wait to find out what's left of it in the morning. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, All right, but you're not sitting in it alone. Reardon said, I'll get Greer. She looked at him. Tom doesn't need to. Tom already knows. Reardon said simply. I told him this afternoon when I told Nathan. He said to tell you he'd be wherever you needed him. She looked at the table. She looked at the paper in her hands. She thought about Tom Greer and his father's building and the brother in Albuquerque he'd finally decided to call. She thought about Margaret Aldrich and her honest face in the connecting doorway. She thought about Mrs. Caldwell sitting in the chair by the window and refusing to leave. She thought about Clara Grayson, who had sat in that same chair and handed over 12 years of a secret in an envelope and said, You gave me a reason to stop waiting. Tell him yes, she said. There were 5 of them in the end. Evelyn and Nathan and Tom Greer and Reardon, and unexpectedly James Caldwell himself, who arrived at 9 in the evening with his hat in his hands and said to Evelyn, My wife told me about this afternoon. I owe you an apology for taking longer than I should have to see what was in front of me, and I intend to start making it right tonight. Evelyn looked at him. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Caldwell, but I'm glad you're here. They waited. The night was long in the particular way of nights when attention is required and nothing is happening yet, and Evelyn kept herself occupied by doing what she always did when she needed to think. Without thinking, she worked. Small repairs, the kind her hands could do without instruction, the needle moving through cloth in the lamplight, while Nathan sat near the back door, and Greer and Reardon took the front, and Caldwell walked the perimeter outside. At 11:30, Caldwell knocked twice on the back door. Nathan opened it. "Two men on the north side of the building," Caldwell said low and even. "On foot. They've been standing there for 4 minutes." Nathan looked at Evelyn. She set down the cloth she was holding. "Go," she said. What happened in the next 10 minutes she did not see directly. She stayed inside with the lamp low, listening. She heard voices outside Nathan's and then Greer's, and then a voice she didn't recognize saying something sharp and short, and then a longer silence, and then footsteps, and then nothing for long enough that she stood up. Nathan came through the back door. "They're gone," he said. "What happened?" 5 men standing outside a building in the dark is not something hired men from Denver want to explain to a county board member, he said. Caldwell identified himself. They left. That's it, he said. For tonight. She sat back down. She was aware of her hands, which were not entirely steady in the way they usually were, and she let them be unsteady for a moment because she was alone in the workroom and there was no one watching. Then Nathan came and sat across from her at the work table, and she was not alone. "It won't stop here," she said. "No," he said. "But it stopped for tonight, and Monday is 2 days away." She looked at him. He was tired. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he was holding himself, and he was still entirely present, still entirely here, in the way that had come to feel over the last several weeks like the most reliable thing in her life. "Nathan," she said. "Yes. When this is over." She stopped. He waited. "When this is over," she said again. "I don't know what it looks like, for any of us, for the town, for the shop." She paused. "For you." He looked at her steadily. "What do you want it to look like?" She had not let herself think about this directly. She had been too focused on what was immediate and necessary and survivable. But he had asked her directly, and Nathan Cole was someone she had made a practice of answering directly, and she was not going to stop now. "I want the shop to still be standing," she said. "I want Reardon to be able to stay in this valley if he wants to. I want the Cabrera family to know that what happened to them didn't stay buried." She looked at the table. "And I want—" She stopped, and then she said it because not saying things you meant was a habit she had carried long enough. "I want you to still be here." The room was quiet. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "You lost your job," she said. "You came here for a stable arrangement, and I've cost you, Evelyn." He said her name the way he always said it, and the way he always said it still did the same thing it had done the first time, and she was no longer surprised by this. "I told you in July. I stopped moving when I got here. That's not the job." He leaned forward, both forearms on the table close enough that she could have reached across and touched his hand if she'd chosen to. "That's you. It's always been you." She looked at him. She reached across and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held it, and they sat in the lamplight in the back workroom of Harper's Fine Alterations, and held on to each other. And outside the night was quiet, and the building was standing, and Monday was 2 days away. Webb's investigator arrived on a Tuesday 10 days later. His name was Garland, and he was a small, precise man with a leather case full of his own public records, and a manner that suggested he had dealt with men like Grayson before, and had not found it particularly difficult. He spent 3 days in Red Willow Creek. He interviewed Reardon and took his statement formally under oath with a county clerk present as a witness. He interviewed James Caldwell about the board meetings and the road proposal, and the methods by which the proposal had been introduced. He examined the land filings at the county clerk's office and confirmed within his first afternoon the discrepancy Evelyn had identified in the Cabrera transfer documents. He asked to meet Evelyn on the second day. He sat across from her in the shop in the chair by the window which had become, she thought, the chair for people who mattered, and he read through the documentation she had compiled and he asked her the same questions Webb had asked in Tucson, and some additional ones she hadn't expected. At the end of it, he said, "Miss Harper, how long did it take you to compile this?" "About 2 weeks," she said. "Evenings mostly." "Did you have legal training?" "No," she said. He looked at the documentation. "You should consider it," he said, and he meant it as a compliment, and she heard it as one, and she said thank you without deflecting it. On the third day, Garland went to the Grayson Ranch. Evelyn did not know what was said at that meeting. Nathan was not at the ranch by then. He had not gone back after that Friday, and Reardon had quietly gathered his things for him, and Reardon was also absent, staying at a boarding house in town at Evelyn's suggestion for the duration of the investigation. What she knew was that Garland was at the ranch for 3 hours and came back to town alone, and that evening he came to her shop and told her that William Grayson had been advised that he was the subject of a formal investigation for fraudulent land transfer filings with the Federal Land Office, and that he should not leave the territory. "What happens next?" she asked. "The Federal Land Office will make a formal determination," Garland said. "Given the evidence, I expect they'll recommend prosecution. That process takes time." He looked at her. "The Cabrera family will be notified. If the transfer is determined to be fraudulent, the land reverts to the original holder or their heirs." She thought about the Cabrera family. She did not know them. She knew their name and the shape of what had been done to them, and the fact that Reardon had carried the knowledge of it for 11 years, and Clara Grayson for 12, and that the land office records had been sitting in a county building 2 streets away, readable by anyone who knew which questions to ask. "Thank you," she said to Garland. "Thank yourself," he said. "And whoever helped you read those records." He left the next morning. And Red Willow Creek, which had watched the whole week with the particular attention of a small town that understood something significant was happening, without knowing all the details, went quiet in the way of a place that is adjusting to the shape of a new reality. Grayson did not come to town that week, or the next. When he did appear, he was quieter, not visibly diminished, not broken, because men like William Grayson did not break easily, or obviously, but changed in the specific way of someone who has had the foundation of their certainty disturbed and is still working out what that means. He did not speak to Evelyn. She did not require him to. Clara came to the shop on a Thursday 3 weeks after the investigation, and she did not have an errand. She simply came and sat in the chair by the window and said, "My father hasn't spoken to me since Garland left." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. "Don't be," Clara said. She said it the same way she'd said it the first time, and Evelyn believed her the same way she'd believed her then. "I spent 12 years waiting for him to be someone he wasn't. That's over now." She looked at the window. "I've been thinking about what to do next." "What are you thinking?" "I have some money of my own, from my mother." She paused. "I've been thinking about a dress shop." Evelyn looked at her. Clara met her gaze steadily. "Not here necessarily. Maybe here, but somewhere." She paused. "I wondered if you'd be willing to teach me some of what you know." Evelyn looked at Clara Grayson, 30 years old, her father's daughter in the shape of her eyes and the composure of her bearing, and nobody's daughter in the choice she'd made when she walked into the millinery with that envelope. She thought about what it cost to decide you were done being managed. She thought about 12 years and 18-year-old girls, and the particular bravery of people who finally stop waiting for a safe moment. "Come in Monday morning at 7, Evelyn said. "We'll start with how to read a customer." Clara's face did something unguarded and immediate that Evelyn thought might have been the first purely unguarded expression she'd seen from this woman, and then she said, "Thank you, Evelyn." And Evelyn said, "Thank you, Clara," and meant it entirely. The autumn came to Red Willow Creek, the way autumn always did gradually, and then all at once, the heat giving way to something cooler that smelled like dry grass, and the first far-off possibility of rain. The light changed. The pace of the town changed with it, the summer's stretched, exhausted quality replaced by something brisker and more purposeful. Tom Greer paid off the note. He did it on a Thursday in September with his brother standing beside him, and he came to the shop afterward to tell Evelyn, and she said, "Your father would be proud." And Greer said, "I hope so." And they stood in the doorway for a moment, in the easy companionship of people who have been through something together and come out the other side. Riordan stayed in Red Willow Creek. He had expected, he told Nathan, to have to leave to find work somewhere else to start over, which at 51 was a daunting proposition. Instead, James Caldwell had offered him a position managing the county's road maintenance contracts, which was not glamorous work, but was steady and honest, and allowed him to stay in the valley he'd lived in for 20 years. He accepted without hesitation. Nathan built a fence. This was not a metaphor. There was a piece of land on the western edge of Red Willow Creek that had been sitting unclaimed for 3 years, a former homestead whose owner had gone back east and never returned, and Nathan had quietly begun the process of acquiring it in August, while everything else was happening with the focused efficiency of a man who was very clear about what he wanted and simply going toward it without announcement. He told Evelyn about it on an October evening, sitting on the bench behind the shop in the last of the warm afternoons, with the first suggestion of fall in the air. "You bought land," she said. "I'm buying land," he said. "It takes time to go through properly." "You didn't tell me." "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure it was real," he said. "I've started things before that didn't become real. I wanted this one to." She looked at him. The light was going golden and long, the kind of autumn light that made everything look more settled and permanent than summer light did. "Nathan," she said, "what exactly are you planning?" He looked at her directly, which was the only way he looked at anything. "I'm planning to build something," he said. "A house first, then some outbuildings. I have skills enough to do most of it myself, and Greer has offered to help with the framing." He paused. "I'm planning to stay in this valley for the rest of my life if it suits me." "And does it suit you?" she asked. He held her gaze. "It suits me very much," he said. "The question is whether it suits you." She understood what he was actually asking. She had understood it for weeks and had been waiting not impatiently for him to ask it in a form that required an answer. "Nathan Cole," she said. "Evelyn Harper," he said. "You arrived at my door in July with cracked ribs and no supper," she said. "I did," he said. "And you ate my beans and let me bind your ribs, and you said you noticed things because you'd been alone a long time." "That's accurate," he said. "And then you stayed," she said. "I did," he said. She looked at her hands. She looked at the bench which had been in her life for 10 years and had meant nothing particular until a man started sitting on it at noon every day, and it became the best part of the week. She looked at Nathan, who was watching her with that steady, complete attention that she had come to understand was not patience exactly, but trust. Trust that she would get to the thing she was working toward in the time it took her to get there. "I don't need someone to save me," she said. It was what she had always known, always believed, always demonstrated. "I've never needed that." "I know," he said. "I've never tried to." "No," she said. "You haven't." She looked at him. "You've just been here." "Yes," he said. "That's different," she said. "I know it is," he said. She was quiet for a moment. The bench was warm from the last of the afternoon sun. Somewhere down the road, somebody was closing up a shop, and the sound of the bolt sliding home was clear and ordinary and final in the way of endings that were actually beginnings. "Ask me," she said. He reached across the bench and took her hand, and the way he held it was the same way he had held it in the workroom that night in August, sure and present, and not requiring anything from her except exactly what she was already giving. "Evelyn," he said, "will you let me build a house on that land with a room for sewing and a porch wide enough to eat breakfast on, and a bench out back for noon if you want to keep the shop for as long as it suits you?" She looked at him. She thought about 25 years of a town that had decided not to see her. She thought about the bench and the beans and the coin she had slid back across the counter. She thought about Clara and Riordan and Tom Greer and his father's building, and the Cabrera family getting a letter from the federal land office that would tell them something worth knowing had finally been done. She thought about the way Nathan Cole said her name. "Yes," she said. He smiled. Not the almost smile she had been cataloging since July, The real one, full and unguarded, the one that changed his face entirely and made him look like what he was underneath. The careful quietness, a man who was home. She held his hand in the autumn light and felt for the first time in a very long time the particular solid satisfaction of a life that was exactly as large as she had always deserved it to be. Not because she had changed, not because she had made herself smaller or quieter or more convenient for anyone else's comfort, but because she had held on to her shop and her name and her worth and the stubborn, clear-eyed knowledge that she was worth holding on to until the world finally caught up with what she had always known. The woman everyone had mocked became the woman the town could not imagine being without. The lonely cowboy who had been moving for 6 years finally put his hat down and didn't pick it up again. And in Red Willow Creek, on the western edge of a valley where the autumn light came in long and gold and made everything look like it had always been exactly where it belonged, Evelyn Harper and Nathan Cole built something that neither of them had stopped believing in, even in the years when believing had cost them more than most people would have paid. They built it together, and it lasted.